Hey folks, so today we are going to be talking about Obama to Trump. In other words, this is your last history class with me that is actually a history class. From here on out, we are going to be doing more discussion-based because that's the only class that we have left is Monday. So before I get started with my talk, my partner is laughing at me because of my insistence on showing people this in my lecture. Have you had frothy espresso? Because let me just give you like a public service announcement that this is the shit. Iced milk, not milk, almond milk, frothy espresso. Yeah. And that's the shit. So, this is what I will be drinking as we talk about modern politics. So let's get started. I got froth on my lip. From the beginning. And I realized I didn't tell my partner I'm recording. I forgot to tell him. My bad. Okay. So historians disagree on where you're supposed to stop a 100 level class that talks about history, given the fact that history is annoyingly persistent and that it keeps happening to us. This is what happens, by the way, when I deliver my lectures in the afternoon. I have a significant amount of energy. Okay, so where we're supposed to stop our conversation about history is a little bit confusing. If you want to think about this lecture in a different way then, this is how I transition you from the historical story that is very much history to you because, you're young, into our modern political moment. This is the political world you were looking at. And I want to do that because the social legacies that you've been looking at have a little bit more of a shelf life. They're a little bit more longer, but politics changes super, super rapidly. So that's the reason why in the last few classes, we've really shifted our attention to politics. And I want you to have a sense of what the Democratic and Republican parties are now, how they came out of the elections of 2008 and 2016, how you can understand your political role in them, and ideally, I want you to get a sense of what your own political commitments are so that you know how to vote for, who to vote for, how to vote in the upcoming 2020 election, which is going to be a massively important part of your coming to in political consciousness. Okay, what do you need to know? How did Barack Obama navigate Republican and Democratic divides? Increasingly, we are learning what the Republican Party is, what the Democratic Party is. How is Barack Obama doing that thing where you become president by catering somewhat to both of them? How is he navigating that in the legacy of Clinton, who also navigated that? Why do you think Donald Trump won the 2016 election? This is kind of the million-dollar question that, nobody knows the answer to. So we can talk about some of that, but hopefully your training in history now gives you a basis upon which to have that conversation. How is Trump similar to or different than Ronald Reagan? I ask this question because Trump has compared himself to Ronald Reagan. Does he do that? Is he what Reagan was? Is he something else? Has he changed the Republican Party? Has he brought the Republican Party back to its roots? That's sort of how I want you to be thinking about Trump. How does Trump fit into, and there's lots of other ways to think about Trump, but how does Trump fit into the historical legacy that we've discussed? That's the focus here. And how has our current political world, things that are in existence now, the divide between the Republican and Democratic parties, the role of the Electoral College, the social divides in the United States, foreign affairs, how have these things been shaped by the 20th and the 21st centuries? That's a big question that you are not going to be able to answer very easily. It's also why it's one of your essay questions that's a possible one for the test. The first thing to do is to talk about the election of 2008. This is where we left off in our discussion on Bush. Because when we talked about Bush is out of office by 2008. What's remarkable about that is that, Bush was pretty much universally not liked by 2008. Now, he was ineligible to run again. He already had served 2 terms. He couldn't run for a third. But his vice president also didn't run. So, usually there's some remnant left over of the outgoing party that runs as that party, but Republicans got rid of Bush and his legacy. They went with John McCain. who now has passed away. But John McCain, that's a broader story. John McCain he advocated for traditional republicanism. He said he was going to be aggressive. He was himself a veteran. He promised to return to Reagan-era politics. He said, we don't live in a good time. We want to go back to what the Republican Party can be, used to be, that strong Republican Party. But he campaigned against someone who was vivacious. Barack Obama, as a politician, was someone that just hadn't been seen by the United States before. He was young, he was energetic, he was highly trained and highly experienced by a young age. He promised an end to the recession, which also McCain promised. He promised an end to the war. McCain didn't promise an end to the war. He said we need to be aggressive in foreign wars and we may be there for a while, even though universally people did not like the war in Iraq. So that was a mark in Obama's favor. And overall, he said we need change. We need a different world. We need to be represented by more young people, not this old guard. We need to look different as a country. And he physically, as a black man, represented that. So before we go on, I want to play you a couple of campaign ads and talk about them, which in modern U.S. history is like my favorite thing to do. Not that modern. We will get to you, Hillary. Let's talk about McCain.
The last 8 years haven't worked very well, have they?
He's a Republican, and the Republican was in charge. So I again want to emphasize that people are distancing themselves from George Bush Jr.'s legacy because nobody liked what he did.
I'll make the next 4 better. Your savings, your job, and your financial security are under siege. Washington is making it worse, bankrupting us with their spending, telling us paying higher taxes is patriotic, and saying we need to spread the wealth around. They refuse common sense solutions for energy independence. So every day we send billions to the Middle East. We need a new direction, and I have a plan. Your savings, we'll rebuild them. Your investments, they'll grow again. Energy, we'll drill here, and we'll create a renewable energy economy. Lower taxes and less spending will protect your job and create new ones. That'll restore our country. Stand up with me. Let's fight for America. I'm John McCain, and I approve this message.
So a couple things about this. You see that McCain is not celebrating the legacy of Bush, right? We have too much in military spending. We are sending too much money to the Middle East, whether that be through war or economically. In order to get a dependence off of that, we need to focus on energy in the United States. And you said that there's a really vague, it's not going to be renewable energy because it's going to be oil, but it is going to be renewable energy because that's sustainability. So he's got both of those things kind of going on there in that mediation. McCain, though, also says we need to promote jobs by cutting taxes. That is a very popular Republican phrase, right? That's the Republican refrain. So he's going back to that traditionalism of Reagan by saying, well, we're going to cut taxes, but we're also going to cut the national deficit because we're not going to spend like we did. This is also showing you that McCain ran with Sarah Palin as his vice presidential candidate. Sarah Palin was meant to balance out McCain. McCain was older. Many people worried that he wasn't able to fulfill the duties of the office simply because he was an older man, right? And so they ran as his vice president a very Republican but young woman who was highly energetic named Sarah Palin. So Palin was supposed to kind of balance out that ticket and appeal to young people. Barack Obama, though, appealed to young people much more. And when I say young people, I mean me, because this was my first election, and I was young. I'm not anymore. Now I'm an old lady. I'm proud of it, damn it.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
What if? What if there was hope instead of fear, unity instead of division? What if we had a president who believes that we are one nation?
There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
Barack Obama, an organizer who helped communities devastated by plant closings, a state legislator who brought Republicans and Democrats together, who won health care for 150,000 people, a leader with the judgment to oppose the Iraq War before it began. a senator who championed reforms to rein in the power of lobbyists. What if we could restore America's place in the world and people's faith in our government?
We are one people, all of us pledging allegiance to the Stars and Stripes, all of us defending the United States of America.
So Barack Obama's campaign was really interesting because he did campaign on pretty traditional democratic ideals. This idea that the government needs to be more involved in education, needs to be preventing power among lobbyists, needs to be making sure that there's a regulation on the economy. That was his note on the closing down factories. So there's that very democratic position, right? But there's also this, no, we have become too divided and we cannot afford division right now. Getting over the Great Recession will require unity. In order to hope, we need unity. And that was his campaign, and it hit home for a lot of people. And it hit home for a lot of people because Barack Obama was not white. And if a president who is not white can promise unity, how incredible would that be? What would that actually look like? And so I can't tell you that Barack Obama swept the polls. That's by no means true. You can see in this presidential election that it was very, very close. And it was very close, again, having the South be that pretty stolid Republican center as it turned out to be first under Reagan with the consolidation of libertarianism and evangelical Christianity, but as it continues to be, right? So Texas went McCain, but also think of all of these areas which we now define as the South. This fault line reemerged. That fault line that, if you've been in my class for a while, you know actually comes from the Civil War, comes from the founding of the goddamn country. So that starts to emerge again. You start to see a North and South divide again in this election, which is really interesting. Nevertheless, he does get all of the he does get the majority of the Electoral College and the majority of the popular vote, so it's not a contested election in the way that 2000 was. There was no way for Barack Obama to run for president and not talk about race. Obviously, this is the first African-American president that we have had. Barack Obama was born to a Kenyan father and to a white American, and he grew up in Hawaii. So he's got a mix of racial backgrounds and experiences. He also went to very privileged schools. He went to law school in, I think, New York. Did he go to Columbia? Anyway, forget me on that. But he's got this incredibly privileged background. And so he's a really unique person in the way that he presents. He also was the member of a pretty traditional black church. And the minister at that church, Jeremiah Wright, who Obama was very close to, and somebody that he relied on in his campaign, but also in his personal life. Jeremiah Wright had some super inflammatory remarks. Inflammatory remarks that he basically said, America deserved this recession. We deserved this recession because we are evil to people all over the world. And everyone looked at Obama and they were like, you rely on him? You rely on this guy? Because he relied on the legacy of Malcolm X. He verged on saying that white people were terrible, right? So Barack Obama, the way that it came up that he had to talk about race was because of comments that Jeremiah Wright made. And he ended up releasing this speech. Sorry, excuse me. Don't laugh at me. You know, most partners would say bless you, but no, I get laughed at. So the way that Obama had to discuss this was by speaking back to Jeremiah Wright's comments. And he did that in this speech that I had you read. And this speech was phenomenal. It was beautiful. It was the way that and I think it says a lot about his campaign and what his campaign was. So one of the things that I want to emphasize is to say, where is my highlighter? The church contains, oh, no, that's actually not the one. Sorry, I have some quotes here. Read them all. They're awesome. The disparities between the African-American community and the larger American community today can be traced directly to inequalities passed on from an earlier generation that suffered under the brutal legacy of slavery and Jim Crow. In other words, what Obama does, and, you know, of course this is why I like it, I'm a historian, he collapsed time. He said, yes, these inequalities exist, but you have to look at the ways that they exist because of the legacy of our past, because this thing that I always say, we carry the legacy of our past with us, and you can't ignore this. We are at a racial stalemate. The anger of Black people is real. That anger is powerful, and to wish it away, to condemn it without understanding its roots, only serves to widen the chasm of misunderstanding that exists between the races. We need to not ignore Black anger. We can't ignore the fact that I'm Black, is what he was saying. We have to instead talk about this. We can accept a politics that breeds division and conflict and cynicism. We can tackle race only as a spectacle. But if we do, I can tell you that in the next election, we will be talking about some other distraction, and then another one, and another one, and nothing will change. And so what Obama said was, we need to figure out what it means for us to come together on this, and that's going to mean having a significantly different world. That campaign was hope. That was the watchword of Obama, is this, and he even wrote a book called The Audacity of Hope, right? This belief that what does it mean to profoundly and really believe in the hope that this country can be more. The promise that we can fulfill the original ideas of democracy. This idea that we don't have to be a world of division and anger and war and economic collapse. That there is something better, and that something better depends on a unified public. That's all lovely, but when Obama took office, he had some shit he had to take care of. So when Obama got into office, like, hope is all well and good for a campaign, and many people got behind that, and it was a very emotional campaign. And I tell you this now, I get to be an old lady, because I remember campaigning for Obama. I remember talking to college students about him. I remember talking to other young people about him, and he was seen as the Messiah. He was seen as, well, we didn't get Gore, but maybe we'll get Obama. He was seen as a solution to a lot of problems at once, and in a way that he didn't necessarily deserve. But when he got into office, all of those ideas, all of those things he had to cope with really came home. I mean, they really came to fruition. He had to deal with the fact that, okay, so nobody liked that Bush got us involved in the Middle East, but then we were involved in the Middle East, and we had to figure out how to deal with those issues. People universally still supported the war in Iraq, not universally, because it was dragging on, but they still in general believe that the war in Afghanistan was good, but nobody liked the war in Iraq. Obama had in fact voted against the war in Iraq, and that was a major thing in his favor when he ran for president. There was a lot of opposition to those wars, but then you had to do something about it. And as the United States found out in Vietnam and would continue to find out, getting our asses out of foreign entanglements is not particularly easy. And that was definitely happening. We're supporting foreign governments that are fighting insurgencies and that depend on us to fight those insurgencies. And they will collapse if we are not there. So getting out of those foreign entanglements was not easy. It was not easy at all. The country was also in economic collapse when Obama took office. The Great Recession had really taken effect by that time. Its worst collapse was sort of towards the end of Bush's presidency and the beginning of Obama's presidency. Job loss, unemployment, housing crisis was a big one. There was a lot of homelessness and a lot of housing insecurity and a collapse of the stock market. So basically, people's savings were wiped out. People's homes were foreclosed upon. There was a lot of difficulty in the economy that he would need to face. Not to mention, he's facing severe issues of environmental disasters, which increasingly many people are arguing are caused by global climate change. So global temperatures are continuing to rise, the ozone holes are continuing to develop, and he's left with the legacy of a couple of Republican presidents that didn't do anything about that. So the United States, by 2008, when he took office, was not very involved in global efforts to combat global warming. And, of course, we are seeing consequences from environmental disasters. So Katrina is the one that happened under Bush, but there would be more. Every hurricane season since 2008 has been a major challenge. And so there was the understanding that, as you well know here, right, there was the understanding that environmental disasters are the new normal, and that became part of what he would have to cope with. What does his legacy look like for these things? Let's talk first about the economy. one of the first things that he did when he got into office was pass the stimulus package, which has a much more official name that I absolutely forget now. But the stimulus package, passed in 2009, was an effort to return to democratic ways to handle unemployment and economic crisis. The first and most important in that was to create jobs. So if you remember, let's go way back, right? Like way back, traditional democratic ways to handle economic shit shows is to say, hey, look, the public is not spending as much money as they were. We need to invest in the economy as the federal government to make that happen. So creating jobs by focusing on public infrastructure. So you get a lot of building of dams and roads and things like that, right? Farms and sewage systems, all of that kind of infrastructural building that the government can pay for, public sector spending by employing people. Then there was also, more controversially, direct assistance to unemployed people. So this is where you get various kinds of welfare like Medicaid, Medicare, and employment, uninsurance, things like that. He also cut taxes. And in traditional democratic fashion, unlike Reagan, he cut taxes for poorer people and he did not cut taxes for wealthier people, which is also, of course, controversial. So he levied high taxes on the wealthy, but not necessarily on the poor. Of course, though, that was not enough to cover the cost of this plan, and it was relatively expensive. Although looking back, I'm going to struggle with this lecture because we are in such an interesting political moment right now that all of this is changing. But looking back, $831 billion seems like relatively nothing compared to what we have to spend to get out of the corona crisis. So it was criticized at the time and criticized until 6 months ago by how much it cost, right? It's government spending, like a significant amount of government spending. And that significant amount of government spending, of course, requires governmental infrastructure, requires more welfare agencies, requires et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Obama also passed what became known as Obamacare, or was the Affordable Care Act. And the Affordable Care Act was Obama's efforts to address a rapidly increasing problem. So we have talked about class inequality, this stratification between the wealthy and the poor, and that stratification was growing and growing and growing. One of the consequences of that was both a consequence and an ongoing cause, was that people could not get good health insurance. If you needed health care, you often had to go into debt to get it, because health care in the United States was expensive. In many other countries, now I'm not telling you that everywhere else in the world has nationalized health care. That's not what I mean. But many other countries put significant checks on health care so that hospitals and drug companies cannot profit so much it keeps people from getting basic care. The United States valued free market capitalism far too much to do that because of our legacy of fear of communism, because of our legacy of free market capitalism. And so for a long time, the United States had neglected to regulate healthcare. And we can see this because even in the 1990s, you have the Clintons that are like, we need to do something about it. And then you have drug companies that lobby to not do something about it, and the issue gets worse. So it was increasingly a problem. Obama passed a law that tried to help with that. And do I have a specific slide? No, I don't. Obamacare tried to put a couple regulations in place that would limit the negative effects of this unregulated healthcare economy. And they weren't completely nationalized healthcare. It was very much so a minimum amount of checks. Those checks included things like requiring that everybody have health insurance, because one of the big drains on hospitals was uninsured people that hospitals were required to care for. It required things like making sure that insurance companies treat people fairly, that have specific, they can't have ridiculous rules against pre-existing conditions. They can't refuse to care for things like abortions. They can't. I love my partner immensely. He bought a new bonsai tree, and it's really adorable that as I'm trying to give you a lecture on Obamacare. No, you can stay in here.
Evidently not.
Oh, marriage is phenomenal. Okay, and did things like say, well, you actually have to pay for health care. You actually have to pay for birth control. And really demanded that employers and insurance agencies actually are held accountable to making sure that people have that kind of health care. Obamacare was highly controversial because, and this is less historically based and much more my opinion based, but it was controversial in large part because it was not nationalized healthcare and it was not unregulated healthcare. It was somewhere in the middle, and therefore it didn't make many people happy. People were very upset about the requirement to have health insurance, but then not being given insurance, and it just didn't make sense because he had to navigate two really opposite things. Here's a world that has never regulated healthcare, and you're trying to put some checks on that, and he's being stopped at every moment. So Obamacare left a complicated legacy. It is, of course, still in effect. Obama also had to deal with the war in Iraq. So the war in Iraq, again, was the war that nobody liked. The war in Afghanistan, nobody likes that we're there, but at least we had a reason to be there in the first place. Iraq was the legacy that Bush left us with that nobody was happy with. So Obama's left with this war that nobody was happy with, that he, as a senator, voted against, and that he promised he would get us out of. But again, how are you going to do that? So in 2011, he proposed a plan that would phase American forces out. This was similar to Nixon's Vietnamization. This was transferring control over to the local troops so that American troops could pull out. By 2013, the United States had instilled a democratic process under Nouri Maliki, and they had also encouraged Iraqi troops to take over the vast majority of the fighting. The problem is that in 2014, the Islamic State actually picked up their attacks in the region, which is a terrorist organization that got much more aggressive after 2014. So the United States was forced to send more troops. The United States remains active in order to be putting down that very violent insurgency. In Afghanistan, you can see a similar story, that Obama tried to get out, and he did make some serious progress, but ultimately the United States remains involved. Because, again, trying to transfer the process over to Afghan troops rather than having United States troops involved. In 2011, Osama bin Laden is finally killed, and that is a significant victory. I remember where I was when that happened, and this makes me feel like an old lady because it's 2020, which means that you guys were probably like, what, 8, 9? Yeah, but I had just gotten to college, and I was on the treadmill in the gym when that happened. And the guy next to me ended up being the president of the college, and we had like a conversation about it, which was like totally cool. Anyway, yeah, in 2011, troops kill Osama bin Laden. This is a great, feather in the cap of Obama. Of course, these things get wrapped up into people that didn't actually do them. And then troops do manage to pull out somewhat of Afghanistan, but the United States is still in Afghanistan. Now, interestingly, I was reading that on March 4th, a peace deal was negotiated in Afghanistan, but that story is a month old, so you're going to have to keep following the news in order to learn more about that one. Obama is actually also responsible for navigating the relationship with another country that the United States has virtually never managed to get along with, called Iran. Now, for a long time, people were very concerned that Iran was developing nuclear weapons. In order to prevent this, the United Nations and a whole bunch of super powerful nations said, hey, Iran, get your shit together and don't do that. And if you get your shit together and don't do that, we will trade with you. That is the basis of the Iran nuclear deal. We are going to allow you to participate in national trade if you stop developing nuclear weapons. That went through. It is the basis on which European nations trade with Iran now, and was a super popular negotiation for Obama. But on the accusation that Iran was developing nuclear weapons anyway, Trump has actually pulled us out of that deal. Obama is also criticized for being far too lenient with Russia, specifically with Vladimir Putin. Obama tried to negotiate good relationships with Russia, and he did this in the context of growing tensions in the rest of the world. And he tried to do this because he wanted to collaborate with Russia on environmental issues, which he did. But he also didn't hold Russia accountable for some of their international activities. like some of their involvement in the Syrian civil war, or their suspected involvement in the Syrian civil war. So the Syrian civil war is just something I want to alert you to. It is a conflict that has been going on since 2011, and Obama was pressured, and then Trump was pressured to be more active about it. But both presidencies have really hesitated to send troops to the region. We do financially support rebelling groups in Syria. So if you want to put Obama on the scale of justice here, like if you want to look at Obama overall and his legacy as president, first off, it's not possible. His legacy ended his presidency ended 3 years ago, and we don't really know what the long-term ramifications are going to be. But we can say some things. We can say that Obamacare changed things profoundly. It changed a lot of things. It fixed a lot of things. It made birth control normal. It put restrictions on employers from discriminating against people. It helped a lot of people that didn't have insurance get insured. And it started to hold companies accountable in a way that they hadn't been before. On the other hand, Obamacare did not work perfectly. It was not nationalized health care, in that it was not freely accessible to everybody. It still cost money. And it made healthcare more expensive for wealthy people. And a lot of people disagree on the issue of pre-existing conditions. Are you willing to pay higher healthcare insurance so that people can be taken care of if those people engage in risky behaviors? That's a question, right? Are we beholden to one another? So there are a lot of fundamental questions of social responsibility that Obamacare raised that people just don't agree on. Another positive, there are a decreased amount of people in the Middle East. On the other hand, we're still in the Middle East. That's because these issues are really difficult to resolve. Some people argue that Obama should have just left the Middle East to deal with those problems. But it would be in Obama's years that leaving the Middle East was the universal goal by the time that Trump was elected. Obama's years also, the stimulus package did see some recovery from the recession. However, that recovery took a lot of time. In fact, that recovery really only kicked in the second term of his presidency. So a lot of people weren't sure whether that was the natural course of events or if it was actually the stimulus package that fixed things. And then the last two here don't relate. Environmental policies, I think we can put that in the positive unless you don't believe in regulating businesses. In that case, I suppose you'd put it in the negative. Because Obama did make sure that the United States actually followed the Paris Agreement to be part of international attempts to regulate the environment. He tried to get us involved in an international community that was trying to fix things. On the other hand, those environmental policies did lead to the greater regulation of businesses. So if you don't like the regulation of businesses, you wouldn't think of that as a positive. And negatives are, you could put this positive and negative by saying he cultivated a good relationship with Russia. But whether or not we should have a good relationship with Russia came as a bit of a question in the 2016 election, which is what we're going to talk about next. So the 2016 election was the most controversial election I have ever lived through. Would you say that about 2016?
Yes.
My partner would also say that about 2016. I was in Pennsylvania at the time that this election took place. I remember that when Donald Trump secured the Republican vote to run, people were pretty shocked. In fact, a lot of Democrats were like, this guy will never win. This is perfect. There's no way they could elect him. But nevertheless, the Democrats, wanting to be in control and seeing criticisms of Obama, put a less left-wing Democrat in the seat. Hillary Clinton was known as kind of a war hawk. She was very experienced. She played on the legacy of her husband's presidency. And she divided the Democratic Party a lot in that she wasn't as left as many people in the Democratic Party wanted her to be. She was much more centrist. And Donald Trump, well, people are going to be talking about this one for a long time. Donald Trump was an outsider. He capitalized on being an outsider. He was offensive to pretty much everybody, but he capitalized on being offensive. He was a media darling. He was a business magnate, so he said, I know what to do for the economy because I've known what to do for my businesses. He said, we're going to return to traditional Republican goals, especially in his campaign promise to make America great again, which is exactly what Ronald Reagan had said. So he said, you know what? I'm a businessman. I'm not a politician, and that's what we need right now. The election was very contested because for the first time, you actually had a significant number of faithless electors, which I talked about that in the last class. I talked about the consequence of faithless electors. Nevertheless, it meant that Trump won the election. Why Trump won the election is actually something that people are still talking about. So let's take a look at some of the campaign ads. Wait, what? Cancel. Ba-ba-da-ba. No, we're not watching Barack Obama. We will talk about this later. Here's the Trump ad.
C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government, created by cable in 1979.
Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people. The establishment has trillions of dollars at stake in this election. For those who control the levers of power in Washington, and for the global special interest, they partner with these people that don't have your good in mind. The political establishment that is trying to stop us is the same group responsible for our disastrous trade deals, massive illegal immigration, and economic and foreign policies that have bled our country dry.
So this is an interesting campaign ad because a lot of it is, to be blunt, genius, rhetorical genius, right? He says things like, it's them, it's the establishment, it's everybody's an outsider, it's the people in power. But who the people in power is, they're never defined. And that's why Trump was so widely appealing to so many people, because everybody can sympathize with needing an outsider. And that got a lot of power in this election. You also notice that he says some things that I'm sorry, but I have to call as outright lies. He basically blames Hillary Clinton in the way that you can see him showing Hillary Clinton as he speaks for wars abroad, and that was very much so the Republican Party. So Trump has a unique ability to play to Americans' emotions, to play to Americans' fears, and to lie and get away with it in many instances. And so you see his campaign ads doing all of these things and saying, we need something different. We need an outsider. You need me.
The political establishment has brought about the destruction of our factories and our jobs as they flee to Mexico, China, and other countries all around the world.
That's a criticism of NAFTA, by the way. Go back to our lecture on Clinton and look at the lecture on NAFTA. One of Trump's central campaign promises was to renegotiate NAFTA, which he did.
Global power structure that is responsible for the economic decisions that have robbed our working class, stripped our country of its wealth, and put that money into the pockets of a handful of large corporations and political entities. The only thing that can stop this corrupt machine is you. The only force strong enough to save our country is us. The only people brave enough to vote out this corrupt establishment is you, the American people. I'm doing this for the people and for the movement, and we will take back this country for you, and we will make America great again.
So you can see in there that there's a lot of talk against the establishment. Why does that have a lot of power? Because his opponent was married to a president. Because his opponent is what he defines as the establishment. And because in 2016, there were serious accusations against Hillary Clinton of having shared her email inappropriately. And those were a central part of the campaign. Let's play some of Hillary Clinton's ads. What did she say in response?
But tomorrow, you get to pick. I think we can all agree it's been a long campaign. But tomorrow, you get to pick our next president. So here are a few things that I hope you'll think about. First, it's not just my name and my opponent's name on the ballot. It's the kind of country we want for our children and grandchildren. Is America dark and divisive? or hopeful and inclusive. Our core values are being
And you see there the legacy of Obama, that she's trying to call to who Obama's base was by saying, no, this is still about hope.
tested in this election. But everywhere I go, people are refusing to be defined by fear and division. Look, we all know we've come through some hard economic times, and we've seen some pretty big changes. But I believe in our people. I love this country. And I'm convinced our best days are still ahead of us if we reach for them together. I want to be a president for all Americans, not just those who support me in this election, for everyone, because we all have a role to play in building a stronger, fairer America. The second thing I want you to know is this. I will work my heart out as president to make life better for you and your family. We won't always get it right, but you can count on this. I've never quit, and I never will. I'll get up every day determined to keep America safe and strong and make our economy work for everyone, not just those at the top. And finally, working for children and families has been the cause of my life, but it's never been more important than it is right now. This has to be our mission together, to give our kids and every American the chance to live up to their God-given potential.
Okay, she did a lot of really interesting things right there, so I'm going to pause her as I talk about a couple of that. You see heavy influence on children and families throughout this speech. Why? Because Hillary Clinton's a chick, and she's got to convince people that chicks can be politicians. How do you do that? It's just like mothering. It's like mothering the nation. I totally got this. I've got kids, you got kids, I got a family, you got a family. We can make this work. 2, running on the legacy of Obama. Very, very important. Utilizing the word hope a lot. Talking about unifying a base a lot. 3, she also used God in there. So she's also much more trying to gather that Republican base, especially that religious conservative base. And in that, she's much more conservative than many Democrats wanted her to be.
So tonight, I'm asking for your vote. And tomorrow, let's make history together. I'm Hillary Clinton, and one last time, I approve this message.
Clinton ran a rough campaign. Trump ran a stronger campaign. And in the end, Trump's vociferousness got him elected. That's still going to be a debate for a very long time. You're welcome to fight with me about that. Part of what you read for the Common Reader program, that Hillbilly Elegy, was actually, part of that was really trying to explain the election of Trump and why Trump was appealing to a lot of people. So we can talk more about that if you'd like. Things that Trump promised when he came into office. He promised to build a literal wall between the United States and Mexico. This wall exists in like 2 places in like one panel. It's never actually materialized because Trump debated who should pay for it, and that never got resolved. However, Trump did significantly limit immigration by changing immigration policies in a variety of ways. He's also been accused of being very racist against people who want to come to the United States because he tries to limit what used to be very common and very legal procedures for coming to the United States to seek asylum. Trump promised to drain the swamp. By this, he meant he was going to take out people that had been in power too long in the White House. And Trump did drain the swamp. He took out a lot of people when he became president, and he replaced them with a lot of different people. Whether or not you think this is a good thing is whether or not you like the people that he replaced with, right? And there's been a lot of debate on whether or not the officials that he has elected have been good officials. So whether or not you like the idea that he drained the swamp depends on whether or not you liked what he replaced it with. He promised that he would repeal Obamacare. He actually used those words, right? He said he would repeal Obamacare. But over the course of the first few years of his presidency, that repeal Obamacare became that he'll change Obamacare, became that he will develop a health care plan. And that didn't actually materialize in any way. In fact, if anything, over the last few years, advocacy for a nationalized healthcare system has actually grown stronger, which is why it's been a very big part of this upcoming 2020 election. And he did promise to reduce environmental restrictions on businesses, which he very much so ended up doing. The Dakota Access Pipeline was part of this, right? He promised to support businesses regardless of the kind of energy that they used, and he did do this. He actually also pulled us out of the Paris Agreement, so we are not really any longer a big international force for climate protection. So Trump's presidency has been one of nearly constant controversy. From the questions over whether or not Russia interfered in the election, which it's pretty much universally agreed on now that they did. The extent to which Trump knew about that is the only disagreement. Trump's relationship with women, he's notoriously sexist. Trump's relationship with people who are both sexist and pedophiles are also up for controversy. Trump's decision to repeal and renegotiate NAFTA was also a controversy. The people that Trump decided to put in charge of the EPA, who support oil and coal, were also a controversy. The way that he handled antagonistic relationships with North Korea has also been a controversy. And certainly what he is doing to fix the coronavirus is going to be a controversy. So when I say controversy, I don't mean that it's bad. I mean that everything that he has done has caused further divisions. And I don't even know that you could say that that's Trump's fault. It just is what our political moment is. And it's important because I want you to understand it has not always been that way. We have not been this divided as a country for a very long time. And part of that is the issues. Part of that is also just his personality. So that is probably going to be a really important part of the 2020 election. As you know, for your reading reflection, I've offered you the ability to look up an article on President Trump that evaluates his presidency. But I want to clarify, and I sent this out in an email earlier today, that your news article should come from a smaller range of sources than you may think are legitimate. So this is a really excellent map to help you navigate what is biased in news sources. And I find that this is really an important thing to rely on and has been more important for me in the last couple years as well. So I get most of my news from NPR, but I am aware that that is a slightly left-leaning source. It is better to get your news from Reuters, ABC. NPR is remarkably accurate. You can see that they're also still rated very high up here on this reliable reporting, right? But there are plenty of things on both sides of the aisle that are not reliable at all. And so this is a really excellent, let's just go to the... It's a really excellent way to get a sense of that, right? Where does Al Jazeera fall? Where does the Washington Post fall? Where does Fox News fall? And then there's different ones for online versus on TV, right? So I want you to keep a close eye on this as you look at your news sources, because I want you to be critical of the way that you understand news in the modern world. Okay. That's what I've got for you on the modern world. And basically, the only question that I have left is, what the hell do you want to do about the world that you're facing? That's the question that we are going to talk about when we meet for our Zoom class on Monday. Okay, y'all have a great day, and I will talk to you later.